All right. Let's continue our discussion of job order costing. And what we're going to be looking at in just a moment is a question where we use what we call departmental rates. And we're going to use departmental rates anytime that we have multiple departments in a manufacturing environment, which is almost always going to be the case, but sometimes those different departments will have different activity level cost drivers. Okay, so in those situations, it would be appropriate to maybe use one cost driver for one department and another cost driver or activity level for a second or third or fourth department. Okay, so we've got a little true false question here to get us warmed up. It says the use of a departmental rate has the advantage of being simple and reduces data collection requirements. And they want to know, is this true or false? Well, if you were listening to what I just said, you probably have an idea as to what the answer is. And this is, in fact, a false statement. Okay? Using departmental rates is, coming up with a predetermined rate for any one department and estimated overhead and so forth is really not any more difficult than using a single plant-wide rate. However, we have to break down our estimates of overhead, so that's certainly not simple. And then we're going to increase data collection. So that's why this is a false statement. All right, now I want you to pay very, very close attention to this question here. What I want to tell you is that this question is not very difficult. Okay? It looks, when students see questions like this, they often freak out. All right? But what do we want to do here? Anytime you ever see a really, really long question, okay, or something with all these, columns and whatnot, what you need to probably do is drop down immediately and read what the actual question is. So Bronson decides to continue using departmental overhead rates. Okay, so that's, we're going to have probably more than one activity level, cost driver. What are the predetermined rates for assembly and testing departments, for the assembly and testing departments respectively? So all they want to know is what the predetermined rates are. So if we go up here to the top, we've got some information. So what we looked at before was we looked at taking the total overhead for the company and then dividing that by some type of activity level. But in this particular situation, it says that we're going to use departmental overhead rates. And we can look right here, and they're going to basically walk us through this. It says Bronson uses departmental overhead rates, good for them. In the assembly department, direct labor hours are used to apply overhead. However, machine hours are used to apply overhead in the testing department. So they're telling us, they're basically, they can't do anything more than hand us the answer here, because all they want to know is predetermined rate. Okay? So when they get down into this business here about actual data for the month of May is as follows, I don't care. None of this is going to matter. Now, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. We could have asked a completely different question here to where we actually needed this information for May, but in this particular case, we didn't. Okay? So they're going to tell us that, for assembly, that we've got $700,000 of estimated overhead. So the estimated overhead amount, again, as with a plant-wide rate, it's also true for when we're using departmental rates. The amount of estimated overhead, this time for the department, is going to be our numerator. And they've told us that in the assembly department, we're going to use direct labor hours, and they are right here, 150,500. Okay. And then in testing, they're going to tell you that we've got estimated overhead of $100,000. All right. And we're going to be using machine hours. Now, it's important that they tell us this, because we cannot assume that that these machine hours are, one machine hour is equivalent to one direct labor hour. So the fact that they told us certainly helps us out a lot. Okay, but I want to say one thing. Let's just say that you get an oddball question and they don't give you this information here, and you have to make a judgment. They just basically say, pick the most, the question says, what's the, determine the predetermined overhead rate by selecting the most appropriate activity level. Okay, if you were to have that, and that is not what you have here, okay, but I try to cover as many bases as I can think of as I make these things. It's pretty obvious over here that we probably need to use direct labor hours, because there are so many more direct labor hours than machine hours that is more than likely that would be our driver, even if they didn't tell us, okay? And the fact that we're using departmental overhead rates should clue us in immediately that the driver, the activity level for testing, must be something different than assembly, right? So if we're going to use direct labor hours here, and it's a question about departmental overhead rates, then, and there's only two departments, well then it's pretty clear that we're going to use the opposite of what we used in the other department, okay? We're not going to use the same thing. Otherwise, we could just have a single plant-wide overhead rate. All right, so I just kind of wanted to discuss that for a moment. So let's bring our not-so-trusty calculator over here and execute the math. Probably didn't leave myself enough room, as usual. $700,000 estimated overhead and assembly divided by 150,500 direct labor hours gives us rounded $4.65. So I probably can squeeze that in here. $4.65 per direct labor hour. Okay? And really that whole part there is the answer. Let me move that up just a wee bit. Okay, and then over here in testing, we've got 100,000. So let me clear this out. $100,000 in estimated overhead cost divided by 72,000 machine hours. Looks like rounded is going to be $1.39 per machine hour. And that is going to be our answer. And we are completely and totally done with this question. Make sure you read the question. Do not feel the need to use every number that is thrown at you. Because what these people do, what I do, what other people do that write these questions, all right, is they'll, it's a lot of work to get these scenarios all drawn out. So we'll make one scenario and we'll ask you a real simple question like this one time, but then the next time we'll ask you, how much overhead was applied in the month of May, okay? Because we have all the information that we need. And if we do that, we're going to have to do this step that we did, and then we're going to have to apply the overhead. Heck, we could say, okay, how much was applied and what was the variance? Was it over applied or under applied overhead? So just remember, these questions like this are drawn up in such a way that I can ask you a minimum of 4 things. I actually have one question, for example, that I have 18 different variations on that question, and the scenario is the same. It's the exact same scenario, but there are 18 different questions that I can ask you. And that's actually, I believe that's a process costing question. We're not quite to that yet. Process costing, a little bit more involved. So anyway, make sure you read the actual question and don't do more work than what you have to do. All right, let's look at another one here. This question is the kind of thing that will make students panic. Freshly Milk Company produces dairy equipment. Most of its jobs have a number of units per job. In other words, some number more than one. The company has 2 different departments through which all jobs pass. Okay. Overhead is applied using a plant-wide rate of $15 per direct labor hour. So they've already done that math for you. I would point out, do not be confused. The mere fact that they have 2 different departments, does not mean that they're going to have to use departmental overhead rates. If the activity level cost driver is the same in both of those 2 departments, we can still accurately use a single plant-wide rate. And they've even been so kind as to do the math for us. What we did up here, they've already done it. And they've come up with $15 per direct labor hour. Okay? Direct labor wages average $6 an hour. Okay, so it might be some minimum wage laws we're breaking here. And data for job number 3 for the year is as follows. Okay, so let's see what we have here. We have direct materials of $30,000. We have direct labor costs of $50,000 in Department A and $10,000 in Department B. We have machine hours used of 300 so 300. It really doesn't matter what the machine hours are because they've already told us that we're going to use a plant-wide rate based on direct labor hours. So we can kind of, if we wanted to, we could just ignore this. We're not going to need it. We are, however, going to need every other number in this question. So they want to know, again, compute the cost per unit. So let's make this as easy as we can, shall we? And say that, well, what are our product costs? What are product costs? Well, product costs are direct materials plus direct labor plus manufacturing overhead. All right? So they've given us our direct materials as $30,000. Bear with me 1 second. $30,000. Okay. Plus direct labor. Well, they've told us that we have 50,000 in one department and 10 in another. We can probably do that math in our head and come up with $60,000. So direct labor is 60,000. Well, now, how in the world are we going to figure out how to apply overhead? Well, it's pretty simple, actually. We're going to take this $60,000 here, and then we're going to divide it by the average hourly wage of $6. And if we do that, we can surmise that we had 10,000 direct labor hours. Okay. So we say, okay, $15 per direct labor hour. Okay, I think I can handle this now. $15 times 10,000 direct labor hours is $150,000. All right, so if that's the case, that's our applied manufacturing overhead, the $15 per direct labor hour, and we had 10,000 of them, so we can put that here. $150,000. So if we add all of this up, 30 plus 60 plus 150 is going to be 240,000. And so we're going to take our 240,000 and we're going to divide it by the number of units produced. So 240,000 divided by, that's our total product cost, that 240,000 divided by 34,000 units produced gives us rounded. And there you see it, $7.06. So let's just go ahead and put that right there. And that is all we have to do.